Hello everybody, welcome back to Anglo Election Insights, where today just going to throw together some tidbits mostly relating to Victoria, whether it's just sort of bits of news from party insiders or this exit poll that's just come out or other anecdotes, just little bits and pieces to help me fill out a little map of Victoria based on where I think things are going, and I'll be seeking your thoughts in the comments below. So I'll start with this exit poll that has come out. Now it shows basically what I would say is a pretty unreasonably high vote for both major parties. The Greens not doing so well, the other minor parties, One Nation, not doing particularly well. And I wanted to relate a bit of my own experience here. I was a candidate at the 2022 federal and state Victorian elections. I was a minor party candidate, and I spent a lot of time on pre-poll, and one thing I noticed was that in the early days a lot of the party faithful turned up, a lot of older voters turned up, and then as time went on, particularly towards the end of pre-poll and then on polling day itself, I would see like families with adult children, and the adult children would make a beeline straight for the Greens, or the full kind of spectrum of demographics began to turn up more and more as pre-poll went on. So just keep in mind that this all this talk of perhaps minor parties or the Greens or other candidates perhaps doing quite well this election, and that being contradicted by this initial like day one exit poll result, just keep in mind that the trends are probably going to change over time. The other thing is, it does show like generally a Labor lead, like pretty close on primary votes, but if you look at preferences, Labor would certainly have the advantage. But again, it was done in like 20 different seats, and then they've basically just thrown together the aggregate of all the results and published that as a national result, whether or not that's actually representative of like the national electorate. One thing I want to keep in mind is that perhaps the biggest fail of polling in 2019 wasn't all of the published polls in the lead up to the election, but the thing that really struck me was the exit poll was wrong. So YouGov Galaxy did a poll of 3,300 voters in 33 different seats and found Labor ahead 52 to 48, which more or less lined up with what News Poll and Essential and all them were saying would happen. And then we all know what happened. It was essentially the mirror image. There were some pretty bad polling misses. So, for example, like in Victoria, the exit poll had Labor in front by 5 points. It ended up being more like 3, so a 2-point miss there. New South Wales, it was like a 3.5-point miss in favour of Labor, and then Queensland was the big one, where they missed it by about 5% on two-party preferred. So can't always rely on these exit polls. Having said that, you guys might remember in Queensland late last year, there was a pretty damning exit poll that came out that showed Labor really struggling. The primary votes here were 48% for the LNP, which was overstating it a little bit, and the pollster does say that that's probably because there was more of a regional focus in this poll. But they actually got it pretty much right on Labor and the Greens. They're slightly understating them, which, again, being sort of more centered on the regional seats, that was likely to happen. So don't be trusting the exit poll too much, but we will go through it in a bit more detail anyway. So brace yourself, guys. I've got a pretty funny map here. There it is. Okay, so Coalition winning 22 of Victoria's seats, Labor on 13, the Greens on 2, and Helen Haines winning Indi. So what I've done is I've basically put together every little tidbit that kind of supports the view that the Coalition might be competitive, or they might be looking good in a seat, whether it's literally just some, Liberal Party insider hopium or whatever it is, and I've basically just flipped whatever seat they're talking about based on that. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go through what some of these bits of information and data are, and then evaluate if they actually hold water. And if they don't, we'll flip the seat back and we'll see kind of where we actually are in reality. So firstly, just an interesting point here. Kevin Bonham has drawn attention to this flyer that the Liberals are circulating in the seat of Macnamara. What comes to mind is this style of campaigning that you often see in the UK, where they'll grab like some dodgy seat poll or like a district election result or something like that, and basically parties like the Lib Dems or Labour will identify that they are the party of the centre-left that is in the best position to knock off the Tories in that seat, and they will attempt to convince voters to vote tactically for them rather than for their preferred party. And that's exactly what the Liberals are doing here, based on a poll that was commissioned by Advance Australia in the seat of Macnamara. Now, perhaps I'm being a little bit cynical here, but it is in their interests, ultimately, to convince voters that the Liberals are sitting on a high primary and that the Greens are ahead of Labor, because then they can kind of go with this message that Labor are going to get knocked out of the count and you're better off voting Liberal if you want to stop the Greens. Of course, as Kevin Bonham points out, if your preference is for Labor and you're worried about them getting knocked out of the count, then and therefore the Greens might win the seat, well, all you have to do is vote one Labor and then put the Liberals ahead of the Greens in your preferences. Pretty simple, but unfortunately, the major parties still quite committed to telling outright lies, essentially, on their campaign material in order to win more votes. A little bit sad, but that's I guess when you've got compulsory voting, the major parties do look to cater to the lowest common denominator at times, and this is a bit of a result of that. It's a little bit sad to see. So let's start working away at that map of mine. So firstly, the Nats, they have basically got 3 seats in Victoria sewn up. So that's Mallee, Gippsland and Nichols, which won't have an independent challenger this time. And apparently they're sitting on quite a big war chest, because they've decided to spend about $1 million campaigning in the seat of Bendigo, where they've got a pretty strong candidate, and they're looking to invoke a bit of like poor sentiment towards local girl Jacinta Allen. It's a pretty safe seat for Labor, but and I think this quote sort of says it all. Labor appear to be more bemused than they are worried, but sounds like basically the Nats don't really have anywhere else to spend that money, and they're just taking a bit of a punt on Bendigo. But I don't think we can really assume that they're necessarily going to get close. Might be interesting if they make the count, and if the Nats have a broader vote base than the Liberals and they can soak up preferences from both the minor right parties and the Liberals, they could make the seat relatively marginal, but I highly doubt they're going to take it. So let's go ahead and flip Bendigo back to Labor, but we'll put it on a less safe margin perhaps. There we go. All right, next point of order. Let's actually go through this exit poll in the Victorian seats. Perhaps later in the week I'll go through some of the other seats. Firstly, we have a pretty shocking result in Corangamite, where the Liberals are apparently receiving a 16% swing on primary votes and are taking home a slight majority of the vote at 50.2%. The Labor vote's steady, the Greens down a fair bit, and other minor parties from both the minor left and right are taking a bit of a hit as well. Now, the thing is, with this exit poll, there's probably only about 200 respondents per seat, so the sample can be poisoned very easily. But I did read another anecdote of a volunteer at the Torquay booth, which, if you know the seat of Corangamite at all, Torquay is a fairly sort of left leaning and left trending part of the electorate. And they were saying that they were quite surprised at the uptake of Liberal how to vote cards, having observed a pretty strong trend towards Labor and the Greens at the previous election, where they also volunteered at Torquay pre-poll. So, yeah, pretty interesting one there. But at the same time, I don't think we really have enough evidence to say that Labor are in serious trouble here in Corangamite, but it could be close. Certainly could be close. All right, let's go back to the pre-poll. Chisholm. Now, the issue with this is that this swing here is based on the old boundaries rather than the current boundaries. I don't know. The other thing is we don't know which pre-poll centre they've used. So this could be in, and same with Corangamite, this could be in a more Liberal-friendly area, and they've just overlaid the result of a good Liberal booth and sort of used that to imply an electorate-wide swing. Having said that, at 43%, you'd imagine the Liberals would be pretty tough to beat, but that's also a reasonably high Labor vote. I would imagine that the Labor vote probably goes down a little. Maybe the Greens vote goes up over time. But we shall see. Chisholm, I might leave that in the Liberal column for now, because we'll see a little bit more further reporting about it. Over to Bruce, a very impressive result for the Liberals there, with nearly hitting 40% of the vote. The Greens doing quite well. One Nation a little bit down, and others, which is mostly minor right parties like the Liberal Democrats and United Australia Party, they're down a fair bit, which again you would probably expect it in early days of pre-poll. We'll see a little bit more reporting about Bruce later, so I'll leave that for the moment. I suspect in a large electorate like McEwen, the location of the pre-poll centre could poison the sample quite a bit, and that appears to be the case here. Those figures, there could well be a swing towards Labor, but I doubt that it's going to be to that extent, and the swing against the Greens looks a bit silly as well. Goldstein, quite interesting. Significant swing to Tim Wilson, 46.5%. He'd be hard to chase on those numbers, but also a swing towards Zoe Daniel at 39%. Those are very high primary votes for both those candidates, and obviously it's come from Labor and the Greens according to this exit poll. That could just be a strong Liberal booth, maybe around the Brighton area. I'm not sure that he's really headed for 46.5%. Similar to McEwen, the Lions pre-poll location could be important here because those swings look unrealistic. And Solomon's not in Victoria, but that's quite an interesting result too, with the Liberals gaining, or the CLP gaining a lot, but also the Teal polling at 14%. All right, so let's go on to some reporting from the Australian about how Liberal insiders are feeling about Victoria. So hope's fading, apparently, for a big sweep of Victorian seats for Peter Dutton. They're talking more about sort of 2 to 4 seats rather than 4+, as they were originally saying around Christmas time. Chisholm and Aston appear to be the ones they're targeting the most, and that would pair well with this supposed coalition research, which they conducted to try and establish where Labor's ad spend was being targeted. And you can see Wills there up against the Greens challenge, but Chisholm, McEwen, Hawke and Bruce are somewhat surprising. Notice that, I would have thought perhaps they were on the attack to some degree in Menzies and Deakin, but that doesn't appear in their top 5. According to this research, which, it's not independent, or it's not really like being published anywhere except for Sky News, which is where I found it. But I don't even hear Labor really talking much about Aston at all. I think they've pretty much written it off. And it seems that both sides think that Chisholm's very, very competitive, and possibly quite likely to fall to the Liberals. At the same time, McEwen, they're talking about it being quite a possible gain for the Liberals, apparently. The petrol tax saving, the fuel excise reduction is playing well in a large electorate, which I must admit the Liberals are really trying to lean into that here in Wannet as well. There's big banners along the Western Highway spruiking that policy. Some Liberal MPs are talking about Tim Wilson having a decent chance. Others are saying we can't count on it, quote. I'm not sure if that means it's like 50-50 or if they're quite pessimistic, hard to say. And they talk a little bit about Kooyong as well, where basically it's just become this race to the bottom where any kind of goodwill that Amelia Hamer had with maybe those very sort of small L Liberals or young renters or that sort of thing has just been thrown out the window because of the revelations of her being like a bit of a obviously a landlord herself, and then also being the beneficiary of quite a large trust. But at the same time, Monique Ryan's had like a really rubbish campaign herself. So both sides, as I said, racing to the bottom to try and lose voters, it would seem. Aussies Elected did ask me a few weeks ago if Labor were half a chance in Kooyong, and I said no, and I would still say no, but I wonder if at this point Labor's primary could increase, and that might affect ultimately the preference flows to Monique Ryan if it comes down to a pretty tight race. And then this last little bit here, some Liberals are talking about Bruce, which we saw here in the ad spend, featured prominently. I was talking a lot about Bruce around sort of Christmas, New Year's time. I've since stopped talking about it because the Liberals picked a candidate who is Afghani but not of the right sort of particular ethnicity that would have played better in this seat. Also, it appears that the Greens are benefiting from some anger at Labor amongst that community over the naming of a little shopping centre, and just in general the sort of pro-Palestine position that the Greens have taken is playing quite well in that electorate, which would probably really drag on the Liberals' chances of winning that seat. But interestingly, they are talking about it as an outlier. So having gone through some of that, we might just make some adjustments to this map. Firstly, my thought that Bruce was potentially in play, I still think Labor have the advantage. So I'm going to mark that one off. As far as the teal seats go, I think both of them are actually quite line ball. But at this stage, I'm not... Oops, I've made Menzies an independent seat. I'll just flick that back to Liberal. There we go. At this stage, I'm going to have them as slim teal retains. We'll keep moving. So the AFR, this is Philip Curry. A couple of days ago, he was making some inferences that Peter Dutton's movements through Victoria were potentially indicative of some encouraging polling in certain seats. So he's been to Hawke, Dunkley and Gorton twice, and he's been to McEwen 3 times. And even just going back to Bendigo briefly, I think David Littleproud and Bridget McKenzie were campaigning there as well. And yeah, here he's basically saying, well, this kind of tells you what they're seeing in their internal research. And Labor are saying, this was an interesting quote from a Labor source saying that Dutton's message is still cutting through a little bit in some of these outer suburban seats, particularly once the coalition are able to pivot onto issues like law and order, which we know from Redbridge polling is really hurting the Allen Labor government here in Victoria. So yeah, he came to Dunkley, which has experienced a large increase in crime, and then he was off in Gorton in Western Melbourne, promising to fix the local highway, in an area where there are some concerns about how infrastructure spending is targeted more in eastern Melbourne rather than western Melbourne, and some of the feelings of abandonment from the state Labor government. Alright, so armed with all of that, let's go through this with a fine comb. I think the margin is probably going to be a little bit tough in the seat of Hawke. It is interesting to note that Labor are supposedly spending quite a lot of money there, and Dutton's been visiting, but I don't think amidst the national polls we've been seeing that we can really give that one away. Same with Gordon. Bit of fun to pop that in the coalition column, but ultimately at 10%, it's going to take a really remarkable result for the Liberals to overturn that one. Similar in Dunkley, I know that there was the by-election which narrowed the margin to something more like 3%, but in a general election environment with Labor on the ascendancy, I doubt that the Liberals are going to be able to spruik crime enough to win that seat. The interesting one here becomes McNamara. I gave it to the Liberals just mostly out of fun, but also just thinking about that poll result and the potential for Labor preferences to sort of cut the potential flow to the Greens and therefore hand the seat to the Liberals. I don't really think that's going to happen. I think the local member is still strong enough to hang on there against the Greens. I've got Wills as a Green pickup though. I'm very much on the fence, but again, we did see it here in the ad spend very high up, and I did see also something, some sort of reporting that suggested that they expect that seat to go down to the wire, or like it was going to be a tough fight for Labor, something like that. McEwen, I still have as a coalition pickup, same with Chisholm. I've got them defending their eastern marginals and winning Aston, and therefore, when we zoom out, we get something a little bit more reasonable, I would think, with Labor winning 20 of the Victorian seats, the Coalition winning 13, the Greens winning 2, and Independents winning 3, including the 2 Teals. But hopefully that's given you guys a bit of an idea of which seats I think could be close, so are well and truly worth watching, and could change in my estimations depending on what sort of polling we get or any other exit polls that come out. But heaps of stuff to keep an eye on, and yeah, very keen to hear your thoughts in the comments, or if you've got your own anecdotes, maybe you've been out on the booths, maybe you've got something to offer that I'm not taking into consideration or don't know about. I'd love to hear about it. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I'll be back with plenty more videos before the election on May 3. And if you are enjoying the content but you haven't subscribed yet, please go ahead and subscribe. I'd love your support. And please like the video if it gives you value and you enjoy it. See you guys in the next video. Have a great day.